Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Crysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Everybody who talks about firefighting in your business is basically telling you the same thing. Be more proactive, manage your time better, use tools like the Eisenhower matrix, buy a tool that shifts you from reactivity to proactivity, delegate more. The problem is that every one of those pieces of advice treat the underlying problem as a discipline problem. And what I've found over the course of time is that it's not actually a discipline problem, because you can't out-discipline a problem at the system level. What ends up happening is what I call your default system. So it's this thought process that the system you have, whether that's no system or a well-intentioned system, grows into being your default system through a series of decisions. One workflow here, one shortcut there, one bolt-on accessory over here. And before you know it, you have inherited your system default, whatever that happens to be. And the only way out of running your default system is by designing one with intention, by understanding at a really deep level what is happening from the problem or problem or symptom that you are ultimately recognizing or witnessing, to what is driving that. What system is driving that output or that result time and time again? That's why you end up seeing, or I end up seeing, businesses with repeating problems. So, we think that we solved the issue, and oftentimes that gets masked in additional tool purchases or bringing in additional resources, maybe running overtime with the resources that you have. Maybe it's a scenario where, you are growing and, your capacity feels constrained, right? Maybe your backlog is growing. Maybe your cycle times are getting longer and longer and longer, right? So those are just a couple of the things that are ultimately, problems that we see in organizations that are operating on their default system, right? I've talked before about this idea around your lens of experience. And I think some people maybe get the wrong idea or misinterpret what I'm saying. I have a lens of experience. You have a lens of experience. And everybody's lens is valuable, right? My lens of experience is different than your lens of experience, is different than somebody else's lens of experience. So it's this commingled effort or commingled, view of these lenses of experience that can come together to design systems that solve problems and move, the needle further faster, right? And the reason that I think sometimes people get a bit confused by this is because part of the reason that we see these recurring issues happen, right, is that we're trying to solve those problems through our lens of experience. So that contributes to, growing into the system that we've got, right? So I'll say it a different way. If you've never experienced or learned about theory of constraints or systems thinking or synchronous flow, any of those things, would it be reasonable to think that you would look at those as ways to solve a problem like limited capacity or increasing backlog or long lead times, right? Probably not. Maybe even product quality, right? Like probably not, because your lens of experience, you don't have the lens of experience to say, those things solve this problem. Those things we can utilize to intentionally design a different type of system, right? So we're solving problems through our lens of experience, which is why we grow into the existing systems that we already have. I was literally on somebody else's podcast. We were recording the episode earlier today. And, he had this great question around, what do you say in the sense of like, why is technology last? And, why do companies kind of, tend to fail when they are, implementing or introducing technology? And it's really simple, right? It's the same idea of like how we grow into these, kind of our default systems, right? I would almost guarantee that if you're looking at a tool, a software, technology, maybe even a piece of equipment, it's replacing one you already have, right? Very infrequently are we completely, additive in the sense that something new is coming into the mix, right? And so we have this idea that, systems equal technology. And, technology is certainly a part of kind of effective systems, right? But we often skip over the planning, people, process component of the planning, people, process technology that, ultimately helps us build these effective systems, right? So how we get into this cycle of the default system, how it grows over time, how it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? Is this idea that we think, hey, Pipedrive isn't working for us as a CRM. Let's get HubSpot. You know what? HubSpot's terrible. Let's use Salesforce, right? Oh, you know what? Epicor is the worst ERP out there. You know what we should really do? We should get SAP. We should get Dynamics. We should go, and implement, JD Edwards, right? My point is that none of that matters because the tool itself, by and large, functions similarly. So what we think we're doing by solving a problem is actually just extending, right? We're putting another Band-Aid on the system we already have, and we're not actually uncovering the problem at the root cause level, which means that we are not intentionally designing the system for the output that we need, right? And that's what this whole entire episode is all about. It's why problems repeat. It's why we continue to, be in the firefighting and reactive mode. It's why we get frustrated and why our customers get frustrated because they can't get orders when they need it. It's why our teams get frustrated and cycle through, right? It's all of these compounding issues. And when I tried to step back and, listen to what all of the conversations that I've had are kind of telling me, in the sense of, what problems are they experiencing? What symptoms are they seeing? What do we continue to get wrong? I kind of came up with this idea that it's our default system. We've grown into it over the course of time, right? And it's not a broken system because that's the way we've always done it. It's how we operate today. Oh, we, implemented XYZ to solve this part of the problem, right? So it's not a broken system. It's the system we have. It's our default system. And when you're experiencing these recurring problems, when you feel like you're living in fight or flight every day, when you feel like you're constantly running around and putting out fires, or you're being, your kind of bigger growth plans are being stalled, it's because we've not stopped and solved for the root cause and designed a system with intention, right? Planning, people, process, technology. And the thing that I love about what I get to do every day is the fact that it doesn't require you to buy anything new. We can use whatever tools and technology you have, right? We can use whatever people resources and equipment resources you already have. And we can do things like improve product quality, increase cycle time, reduce backlog. What does that do? It makes for happier customers, makes for, more throughput, both in the traditional manufacturing sense, but also when it comes to the customer experience. And so they're more apt to be looking at you as a growth partner, which leads to additional opportunities. And all of that stuff, right, impacts your main levers, financial levers for sure, right? Profitability, cash flow, but also your culture, right? Customer experience. All of those things are impacted by doing these things, by designing the systems that you operate within every day with intention and solving for, the true root cause of what is happening, right? Not another bolt-on, not another Band-Aid. So that's, why I love what I do. And, I'd say another aspect that I kind of see through the work that I've done, with the consulting business, over the last 6.5 years, but kind of more broadly speaking, and I've shared this previously, like the reason I get to do this stuff every day is because I lived, I grew up in this genesis, this is like nearly 30 years of kind of culmination, right? To be able to articulate it in this way. And I think what's challenging about, kind of this idea of your default system and kind of growing into it and getting it to at whatever current state it's at today, it's really difficult. Again, this is back to the lens of experience. It's really difficult to kind of see, what's responsible when you're in it every day, right? So that's the value of bringing somebody in like me. And again, that's not just from a paid engagement perspective. That's why I put out all of the different, tools and workbooks and modules, all of the different ways that we can start to see our default systems, right? So, little did I know is kind of building towards all of this for the last, 6.5 years. And with some of the resources and articles that I've been putting out, I just didn't have a great, kind of name or a great way to articulate it. I knew what was happening. I knew the results that we were getting with, clients and even just helping out some folks through some friendly conversations, some really great folks who are growing. One of the other big challenges that I see with your default system is the fact that it really lands on the backs of your team. And I was sharing, kind of this perspective with somebody earlier this week. And it's really this thought process that, one, when you get to kind of talk to and be in as many businesses as I have, you get this, again, expanded, lens of experience. And what I end up seeing happen with these kind of default systems, and this is, kind of what leads to the cultural element, how people end up burning out is because, we require the system gap to be filled specifically by people. And I'll give you a great example of this. We can use let's use sales for an example for this. And a great sales example of this, because lots of companies out there are actively trying to grow their revenue through kind of traditional sales and marketing activities. And so the example to pull from here is that if our default system has been built up over the course of time to, do traditional sales and marketing activities, what are the things that we expect, right? We expect kind of, maintenance activities, so account management to happen. We also expect probably some outbound or business development types of activities to have happen. And, we look at that and say, yes, we have a customer development system in place, right? We've got marketing activities that, are kind of generating prospects, and those are getting handed over the fence to our, sales team. And those are kind of unearthing conversations and ultimately opportunities. And those opportunities lead to closed business, right? And so we accept that as our default customer development system. But what's underneath that is actually saying things like, hey, Dave, why aren't our revenue numbers increasing? Are you doing enough outbound outreach? Why aren't we getting enough quote opportunities? How many phone calls are you making? How many email responses are you, responding to, and so on and so forth. And so what ends up happening is that there's an enormous amount of pressure put on people to perform and to deliver the ultimate output. But what's missing when you get down to the people level, right? Planning, people, process, technology, is the fact that there is some sort of gap there in terms of, actual execution, could be process, could be, something around the planning aspect. And so it's like we're requiring the output. We've given the goal of the output, but we're missing like the tactical pieces of how that actually happens. And when we get down into it, right, like it's because we don't have a well-defined process to follow. We don't have coaching mechanisms. We don't have feedback loops. And so we really struggle to kind of do the activities, the tactical steps to produce the output and to produce it repeatedly, right? So that's what ends up happening in the sense of not only do we continue to see the problem, so it's a recurring problem. So we're putting out fires because, hey, I sit in a middle management level and I'm having to always tell the CEO, hey, my team, my sales team, my marketing team, they're doing great. They've got all this activity, right? But that activity isn't translating to revenue dollars, right? And you can use the same, sometimes I like to use examples outside of operations so folks can see how this stuff applies everywhere, right? But you can highlight the exact same type of issue from a pure operations perspective as well. But that's what ends up happening, right? So problems repeat. We end up burning people out because we're saying to them, why aren't you getting the output that we need? Like it must be something you are doing. And again, when you start to dig down, what you very quickly realize is that, we haven't enabled the people to actually do this. We're not supporting them in any way. And the supporting element isn't just like a coaching thing or, like something that is intangible or, some people think that's too touchy-feely, right? The reality is that, again, we haven't designed, we haven't built that effective system, right? So we haven't tackled it from that planning, people, process, technology perspective in order to unpack the gaps, right? We understand what the output is and then start building towards. And then, of course, it's a cycle of improvement, right? So we're continuing to iterate on, this intention design, and it's through the lens of experience that we actually get to open that up and solve these problems, right? So if we're going to continue to talk about the front end of the business and talk about increasing revenue, right? We can apply all of the same kind of fundamental and problem solving, techniques that we do in operations, right? It's the same thing said a different way, right? So when we build that effective system, we're still ultimately identifying those smaller gaps and again, closing that loop. So providing that coaching, enabling their ability to execute the process, right? So planning, people, process, technology, using the tech that already exists, right? Whether that's, in our case, we're going to talk about, an ERP probably and a CRM. So whether that's we are, already using this ERP and this CRM to commingle that data and ultimately serve up, the information that the sales and or marketing team needs to action, right? So that's how all of this works and kind of how we move, from our whatever our default system is into one that's been kind of designed with intention, is because we're looking at it through all of these different angles. And we don't just continue to try to bolt on a new module or, one kind of isolated process improvement. We're looking at it through this holistic, systematic lens to understand, do we have everything that we need to be able to move on to this next thing? And ultimately what that does is it increases flow across the touch points of an org and gets us to a more effective output, which is, at the end of the day, all anybody is really after is trying to figure out how to get to the kind of most effective pathway, right, to growth. And so, what do we do on Monday, right? Always my favorite part of kind of every segment. The easiest thing to do is crawl, walk, run, right? So you're not going to fix all of this at once. It starts by you start by kind of getting a handle on what is happening, quantifying that, and kind of starting to, pick and choose your battles, right? So one of the tools that I kind of, built a while ago, but I recently started to talk a bit more about is our cost of chaos calculator. And that's a great starting point because it helps you to quantify what's already happening, right? So the way I kind of look at it is that, every leader that's out there knows they've got some problems. And, it's typically kind of wherever the fire is burning the hottest, but that's hard to contextualize. It's hard to quantify, especially if you're sitting in a leadership role or level where you've got, to answer to somebody else, right? So I put this calculator together. It has some kind of predefined categories, but it's basically 3 steps. And it just gives you a pulse check, a way to quantify, a way to put a number to what you're seeing and feeling every day, right? And kind of once you have that number, now you can start to kind of zoom into the next level. And the next level is really about getting an end-to-end viewpoint of like, what's happening? What does our default system look like, right? And again, there's a bunch of resources that I've created that are out there to help you to do that. Again, always happy to have a conversation. Conversations are free. Feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email, via phone, what have you. But that's the next step is starting to see the default system, how you've grown into where you're at today, and then ultimately, getting to the root cause of what you're seeing, right? So if you're seeing, this problem kind of repeating, it's like, let's get underneath that. Let's figure out, is this a flow issue that if we improve the flow, we can impact, this particular problem? Is there some other way that we ultimately need to, design a more effective system to enable, whatever that output is that we're going after, whether it's, product quality, whether it's inventory management, right? Those are all kind of, breakdowns or symptoms, if you will, of a bigger picture problem. So that's what we ultimately need to get to is that root of what is driving the outputs that you're seeing and resolve for that. Right. And that's kind of, the work that I love. So those are a couple of things that you can do when it comes to what do I do on Monday with this thing. I'll put the link to the cost of chaos calculator in the show notes. You can find it easily that way. And as a reminder, I wanted to share with you that each one of these solo episodes is an extension of our free weekly newsletter, Business System Saturday. So if you're getting value out of the podcast, would encourage you to subscribe there as well. Again, free to subscribe, free to unsubscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And thanks so much. I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Crysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Crysler.